Mike, I had aspirations. I had aspirations. Heck, I even had a hidden savings account for the special trip around the world we were planning to take in a few years. At the annual employee gathering organized by Tracy's small college employer in mid-September, I observed my wife of 23 years blushing deeply and continuing to blush as she conversed with a couple of coworkers. I stood about 15 feet away from her, ostensibly engaged in conversation with another group of her colleagues. Tracy was chatting with Rafe Searcy, a new associate professor of English literature whom I had met earlier, and Janet Barnes, who worked in administration like Tracy. Given the nature of the Christian college environment, I doubted that one of them had shared an inappropriate joke. Thus, there was only one explanation for Tracy's flushed appearance, particularly her sustained blush. She was evidently sexually aroused. Suddenly, I had a response to a question I hadn't even posed. When you've been married to someone for 23 years and together for 25, you tend to know almost everything about them, even if you're not actively paying attention. And if you are attentive, well, as any gambler would put it, I was familiar with all of Tracy's indicators, her sexual cues. Just 10 minutes earlier, I believed I had a flawless marriage with a nearly perfect woman. Yet now, I found myself piecing together the puzzle of some of my wife's recent peculiar behaviors that I hadn't even realized were odd until that moment. Tracy and I were not just spouses, we were best friends, lovers, and the parents of two wonderful children. Unlike many couples, we could spend entire days together without growing tired of each other's company. We could discuss anything from intimacy to historical events, sharing laughter throughout those conversations. I had always quipped that the ultimate test of marital compatibility was enduring a long car ride with your prospective spouse, and if you didn't want to strangle them afterward, you should marry them immediately. Tracy and I fit that description perfectly. In my view, our intimate life was fulfilling. While it had cooled down from the intense passion of our courtship and early marriage, it had reignited when our younger daughter left for college a year prior. Being empty nesters for most of the year seemed to rekindle our more passionate desires, and we oscillated between slow, affectionate lovemaking and vigorous sexual encounters 3 or 4 times a week. Both of us were fitness enthusiasts, maintaining good physical shape at 45. Tracy had long blonde hair, ample curves, and a generous bust. Sure, she may have gained 15 pounds since giving birth to our children, but she still looked fabulous. I had put on around 20 pounds of muscle since graduation, and with 25 years of experience pleasing my wife, I felt confident in my abilities. Something shifted 2 months ago, and while it was mostly for the better, I didn't dwell on it too much. While Tracy had always been willing and enthusiastic in our intimate moments, she rarely took the lead. Suddenly, she was initiating as frequently as I was, and the passion was off the charts. However, our encounters were no longer about making love, they were solely about sex. It was exhilarating, but our focus had shifted. I didn't question it at the time, but looking back, that was a mistake. Except for brief moments when I mingled with her, Tracy and Rafe remained within close proximity throughout the outing, never more than 5 feet apart. Now that I understood the situation, I noticed that Tracy's glow appeared every time she was near Rafe, even in my presence. Whenever I approached, he would quickly disappear, only to reappear once Tracy was free from my side, engaging in conversation with her. Throughout the event, I discreetly kept an eye on the pair, although it didn't require much effort. Tracy seemed completely absorbed in Rafe's presence, paying little attention to anyone else. Not once did she glance around, seemingly unconcerned about my whereabouts. Throughout the evening, she made a point of lightly touching him whenever possible. My emotions ranged from initial nervousness and apprehension to full-blown anger once I was certain of what I was witnessing. It seemed unmistakably like the end of my marriage. Around 11 o'clock, I practically had to pry Tracy away from Rafe. She appeared displeased when I intervened and informed her it was time to leave. Briefly, her eyes flashed with anger before she composed herself, although not quickly enough to escape my notice. Again, the familiarity of our 23 years together. Normally, conversation would flow freely on the ride home, but I remained intentionally silent, waiting for Tracy to initiate. She seemed preoccupied for a while, staring out the passenger window until the uncomfortable silence prompted her to fill it with superficial chatter about the college president's wife's attire. I responded minimally. "Wow, I'm really tired. "I'm going to bed," Tracy announced upon our arrival home. "Are you joining me?" I wasn't sure if she was simply trying to avoid further discussion or if she hoped I would join her so she could release any pent-up frustration from the evening. Regardless, I declined, opting to watch television instead. Her disappointment was palpable. The following day, being Saturday, I spent the entire day working in the yard, allowing myself time to calm down and contemplate the situation. If Tracy sensed any tension, she did an admirable job of concealing it. The atmosphere at home felt strained in the following week. I attempted to maintain composure, but I found myself checking the Find a Phone app on my iPhone repeatedly throughout each day. Each time, Tracy was where she was expected to be. At night, she was more than willing to engage in intimacy. Initially reserved, she soon reverted to her recent pattern of passionate encounters. As always, I ensured her satisfaction with multiple orgasms. Nothing changed on Monday, but on Tuesday, the Find a Phone app indicated that Tracy had returned home during lunchtime. 15 minutes later, I quietly entered the house, confirming my suspicions. Their activities upstairs were not discreet, sparing me the need to sneak upstairs to confirm that Tracy's partner was indeed Rafe. "God, Rafe." "Yes, harder." Tracy's voice echoed from the bedroom. "Oh, baby, you're amazing." That final revelation hit me hard. It took every ounce of self-control not to storm into the bedroom and confront the other man. But I held back, knowing that if I allowed myself to act on my rage, I might not be able to stop until it was too late. Neither of them was worth ruining my life and facing the consequences of a violent outburst. "Tracy, I understand that proclaiming my love for my husband above all else may sound self-serving, but it's sincerely true. I've cherished him for 25 years, and I hope to continue doing so for many more to come. However, I must confess that I have been involved with another man on the side, a situation that I knew couldn't last forever if I wanted to preserve my marriage. Mike, my incredible husband, would be devastated if he ever discovered my affair. That's why I've been doing everything in my power to keep it hidden, although I'm not naive enough to believe I won't eventually be caught. The longer it goes on, the greater the risk becomes. Mike has been my rock for the past 25 years. In our 23 years of marriage, we've raised 2 wonderful children together. He's not just my husband, he's my best friend, my soulmate, and an amazing lover. We used to share everything and laugh together incessantly. But things have changed recently. I never intended to have an affair until I met Rafe Searcy. He walked into the administrative building a few days before classes started, and from that moment, my life took a drastic turn. Rafe, at 30, was tall, fit, with short brown hair and soft gray eyes. He was handsome, though not in the conventional sense. Yet, when I saw him, I felt an intense attraction unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was as if he had sent an electric shock straight to my core. I couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day, consumed by thoughts of Rafe. By the time I got home, I was practically trembling with desire. I'm sure I overwhelmed Mike with our lovemaking that night. We engaged in passionate sex, with multiple orgasms from me before he had his first. I satisfied him orally, then rode him vigorously until I climaxed again. After a brief break, he pleasured me until I reached 3 more peaks, before we made love slowly and tenderly, with one final climax for me. I knew he fell asleep content, but little did he know, he wasn't the one on my mind during our intimacy. For the following 2 weeks, I continued to indulge in passionate encounters with Mike, until an opportunity presented itself when he had to leave town overnight on Wednesday. Despite knowing it was wrong, I couldn't resist the urge, and I arranged to meet Rafe for lunch that day, taking the afternoon off as admin time. Rafe and I met at a cozy Italian restaurant for lunch, where we enjoyed good conversation and laughter. I found myself laughing more than usual, struggling to resist the urge to touch his arms and hands as we talked. Blushing profusely, I felt like a nervous teenager on a first date, my panties damp within minutes of sitting down. While Rafe and I never explicitly discussed intimacy, there was an undeniable anticipation between us. He smiled often, held my hand, and occasionally smirked, indicating he felt the same connection. As a gentleman, Rafe insisted on paying the bill before asking, "Where to next?" "Let's go to my place. It's only a 10-minute drive from here." "Leave your car, and I'll drive," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Knowing Mike wouldn't be home until Thursday evening eased some of my apprehension, but I couldn't shake off all my nerves. Despite being 45 and having had 2 children, I couldn't help but feel self-conscious about my body compared to the younger women Rafe might be accustomed to. I should have felt guilty about what I was about to do, but it felt inevitable in my mind. I loved Mike with all my heart and soul, but I was determined not to deny myself the pleasure I knew awaited with Rafe. Pulling into the garage, I closed the door behind us. The next 10 hours were an incredible blur of pleasure. Rafe seemed to share the same intense connection, and every moment with him felt extraordinary. While I wasn't inexperienced when I met Mike, Rafe completely redefined my expectations. He wasn't physically larger or thicker than Mike, but everything he did surpassed any previous experience. We made love, we indulged in passionate sex, we explored each other fully. It was beyond amazing. I lost count of the number of orgasms I experienced, but when Rafe eventually left in an Uber to retrieve his car, I felt utterly spent and blissfully content. There were screams and tears, most likely from me, but I was too overwhelmed to be certain of anything. All I knew was that I craved more. "You're incredible, Tracy. That was the best sex of my life," Rafe exclaimed, sealing our unforgettable day with a final kiss. Rafe, from the moment Tracy called me, I knew what she had in mind. I had sensed her attraction when we first met in the admin building 2 weeks earlier. It was clear we would end up together after lunch, although neither of us explicitly stated it. Tracy was undeniably a stunning woman, a true MILF with a beautiful face, ample curves, and long blonde hair. A few extra pounds didn't detract from her appeal in the slightest. I noticed the rings on her fingers when we first met, but I knew that marital status didn't always deter a woman. In fact, I'd come to appreciate the allure of married women. They often brought a level of experience and excitement to the table that was unmatched. After enjoying a fantastic lunch together, she drove me to her house, where we indulged in a day filled with passion in her marital bed. With her husband away on a one-day trip, what started as a casual encounter turned into an unforgettable experience. She was incredibly responsive, matching my every move with equal fervor. Throughout the day, she vocalized her pleasure with screams, shouts, and incomprehensible sounds. We made love 3 times, and she expertly brought me to completion once, proudly swallowing every drop. It was undoubtedly the most exhilarating sexual experience of my life up to that point. As I rode back to the restaurant parking lot in an Uber, I couldn't help but hope for more days like that one in the future. Mike, Tracy's deceitfulness shocked me. Despite her flawless facade, I quietly prepared for the impending divorce. I consulted with a lawyer the following Wednesday, and Tracy would be served the following week. While we lived in a no-fault state, I opted to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, a decision that felt petty, but necessary. I couldn't fathom what drove Tracy into another man's arms. Was it my age, or simply his ability to satisfy her more frequently? Regardless, this wasn't a one-time mistake. The Find a Phone app revealed multiple visits home during lunchtime over the past week. I didn't need to be a detective to realize Tracy wasn't going home to eat sandwiches. A wry chuckle escaped me as I recalled a recent incident with my Pop-Tarts. I discovered the last pack missing, a snack Tracy despised. It seemed Rafe wasn't just stealing my wife, but also my snacks. Damn him. Tracy. I woke up Thursday morning feeling invigorated after the incredible night. Despite the logical guilt, all I could think about was wanting more. By noon, I couldn't resist calling Rafe. "My husband won't be home until around 9. If you come over after I finish work at 5, we'll have time for another round, maybe 2, I suggested eagerly. "Park your car in the garage." "I love a decisive woman," Rafe replied. I felt a rush of anticipation as I heard Rafe's car pull into the garage. By the time he entered the house, I was already moist between my legs. "I'm so glad you called," Rafe greeted me. We shared slow, passionate lovemaking in the missionary position. After a brief interlude, I eagerly brought him to full hardness and straddled his hips, engaging in enthusiastic lovemaking from above. I reached climax multiple times, just as exhilarating as the day before. Rafe left around 7:30, prompting me to swiftly change the sheets for the second time in 2 days. Feeling content, I indulged in a refreshing shower. 90 minutes later, Mike returned home. My private moment with Rafe came to an end, and I embraced my husband warmly. I truly cherished him. Yet, I couldn't deny feeling a twinge of guilt as Mike led me to the bedroom for intimacy. It was the first time I had ever been intimate with 2 different men in one day, and I couldn't deny the excitement it brought. "That was wonderful, Mike," I whispered as we cuddled after our second encounter of the evening. I meant it sincerely. Mike was a fantastic lover in his own right. However, the connection I shared with Rafe was extraordinary, on a level I had never experienced before. It felt like a completely different experience from what Mike and I shared. I refused to feel guilty for experiencing such intense pleasure. In my mind, my encounters with Rafe were separate from my life with Mike. With Mike, intimacy was about emotions, while with Rafe, it was purely about physical sensations. We continued to meet twice a week. I knew it couldn't last forever, but I was determined to enjoy it while it lasted. Mike, I anticipated Tracy being served with divorce papers at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. It didn't take long for my phone to ring after they were delivered. "No, Mike, I don't want a divorce," Tracy sobbed when I answered. "And I don't want a cheating spouse, but we don't always get what we want, do we?" I retorted. "I can explain. I made a decision for myself." "We need to talk," Tracy pleaded. "Since you disregarded our vows and our marriage, I made a decision for myself too." "So, no, we don't need to discuss your decision," I replied, ending the call. I managed to focus at work, but I knew a confrontation awaited me at home, and Tracy didn't disappoint. "Don't you think I deserved a conversation before you filed for divorce?" Tracy yelled as I entered the house. "After all, we've been married for 23 years. Why?" "Those 23 years didn't seem to matter when you repeatedly betrayed our marriage," I shot back. Tracy's tear-streaked face revealed her distress. I wasn't feeling much better myself. "I love you, Mike. Truly. What happened with Rafe was purely physical." "It was." Tracy's words trailed off. "A decision you made for yourself?" I interjected, finishing her sentence. Tracy appeared taken aback, to say the least. "I'm sorry for hurting you, but I think you're overreacting. We can discuss this," she offered. "I fail to see how, Tracy." "You cheated multiple times, probably more than I even know," I replied. "I understand it looks bad, Mike, but—" Tracy began. "I know, it was just a personal decision, Tracy," I reiterated, my tone laced with sarcasm. "Would you care to elaborate?" Although I thought my sarcasm was evident, Tracy seemed encouraged by my response, even managing a smile. "I can't quite explain it, but there's this undeniable physical connection between us. He makes me feel weak in the knees, and it's the best sex you've ever had," I finished her sentence. "I heard." Her eyes widened, a mix of tears and fear evident. "You heard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you want me to replay it for you? I was in the house last week. You two were too occupied to notice me." "I can't erase that image from my mind," I stated firmly. Tracy at least had the decency to look down in shame. "It was purely physical, Mike. I love you. I can't express how much I love you. Can't we at least attempt counseling? I know I've hurt you, but I know you still love me." She was right about the latter, and that was the most painful part. I still loved her, though not as deeply as I did 2 weeks earlier. 25 years of love doesn't just vanish overnight. Tracy, receiving divorce papers at my office on a Wednesday afternoon was a shock, despite knowing the risks of my affair. I never imagined Mike knew about it, let alone had evidence of Rafe and me together in our bed. Even worse, he overheard me confessing to Rafe that he was the best I ever had. It was a mess. I realized I could never adequately explain the connection I shared with Rafe to Mike. However, I believed his love for me would prevail. I initially suggested counseling, hoping it would salvage our marriage. Our first counseling session didn't go well for me. The counselor, despite being a woman, couldn't comprehend my attraction to Rafe. I had hoped for more understanding, maybe some support. "Did your marriage vows hold no significance for you, Mrs. McGowan?" she asked after hearing my account. "No, they mean everything to me, but this is different," I explained. "It's like nothing I've ever experienced before. You're a woman. You've experienced arousal before. Well, it's like that, only so much stronger, almost like I've been drugged," I said. I could see skepticism in the counselor's expression. Mike appeared bemused by my explanation. Men often get blamed for thinking with their small brains, but women are just as guilty. If today's divorce statistics are any indicator, the counselor calmly addressed my wife. "Yes, the thunderbolt is a real thing, but most people realize they have a choice to ignore that. You chose to give in to your base desires." I couldn't believe the counselor was implying I lacked self-control. It felt like she was accusing me of being promiscuous. Then came the question that likely sealed our divorce. "If Mike were to forgive you and take you back, do you believe you could resist your physical urges and remain faithful to him?" I felt paralyzed, unable to answer honestly. Mike, more than any lie detector, would detect any falsehood. "I love you, Mike. Can't you try to understand? I don't love him, but I feel I need him. It's the best sex of my life. Please, don't ask me to give that up," I pleaded through tears. I stole a glance at Mike, hoping for a sign of reconciliation. Instead, I saw only emptiness in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Tracy. I do love you, but I can't condone your infidelity. I can't forgive what you've done," he stated firmly. "I apologize for not being enough for you," I murmured. "You've always been more than enough for me, Tracy. But this isn't about me. It's about you. And it's clear you don't love me as much as I love you." 2 weeks after our last counseling session, I found myself in bed with Rafe. I didn't care if Mike was watching. I had called Rafe for a lunchtime rendezvous, unable to resist the allure of his company. Despite the divorce, the sex remained phenomenal. He was my weakness, my temptation. I loved Mike, but I lusted after Rafe. And I knew I'd never have Mike back because of it. He didn't love me enough to let me have Rafe. Mike, I was incredulous when Tracy suggested I allow her to keep her boyfriend while still married to me. "If you really love me." What a delusional notion. Regardless of the boyfriend, our marriage was over. I might have been naive before, but I wouldn't be foolish now. Our marriage counselor was surprisingly pragmatic, unlike Tracy. She practically labeled Tracy a cheater during our first session, and things didn't improve from there. After 4 sessions, she terminated our counseling, affirming her support for my stance. Tracy seemed mortified when the counselor ended our sessions. I don't know if Tracy asked my daughters to try to intercede on her behalf, but they both tried hard. "You're breaking up the family, Daddy," my youngest cried when I told her. "No, baby, I'm not breaking up the family. Your mother did that. I'm just making it legal," I said. She screwed up her face and furrowed her brow. I could tell she was thinking hard. "I guess you're right, Daddy," she finally said. "Rafe, I really didn't want to ruin Tracy's marriage, but I looked at it as more her husband's problem. I knew she really loved the guy, but we had an amazing physical connection, and the sex was practically otherworldly. If she wanted to have me, hell, yes, I was going to give it to her. I supposed I couldn't blame him for not wanting to be a cuckold, but again, that's between Tracy and him. Mine is not to wonder why, just to fulfill her desires or move on." Tracy stayed away from me for 2 weeks after Mike filed for divorce. When he didn't relent and take her back, we restarted our affair. In fact, things even improved, because with Mike out of the way, I was getting all of her physical attention. I have to say that Tracy was the best lover I've ever had. Despite Tracy being a great partner, I never thought we'd last any real length of time. At 45, she wasn't marriage material. I knew I wanted children of my own, and she already had 2 grown kids. Also, if she could do what she did to the man she said she loved above all else, what could I expect? I continued to look for Miss Right, although I didn't talk about it with Tracy. She had enough on her mind after losing Mike. Things changed when I found Lucy Ralston about a year after Tracy got divorced. She was 24 with short brown hair, a lithe dancer's body, and we hit it off right from the start. I didn't tell Tracy about Lucy at first, but finally confessed after about 2 months. I knew I hurt Tracy's feelings, but it wasn't like Tracy actually loved me. She and I absolutely connected physically, but emotionally we were just good friends. When Lucy and I committed to being exclusive, I had to tell Tracy we were over. "But I gave up my husband for you." Tracy cried when I told her. "No, you didn't. You gave up your husband for sex with me. There was never an us. It was all about fantastic sex. And that was your choice. But that's not my choice. My choice is about having a wife and family," I said. "Tracy, I was devastated when Rafe told me he was going to be exclusive with Lucy and would no longer have sex with me. But I gave up my husband for you." I cried when he told me. Rafe gave me a look I could only see as pitying. "No, you didn't. You gave up your husband for sex with me," he corrected. I knew he was right, but still. Then, of course, there was the embarrassment of my kids finding out. Mike didn't sugarcoat the truth when we split up, telling the kids that I cheated on him multiple times for the best sex of your mother's life. Neither of the kids were happy with me, but they eventually got over it. Telling them a year and a half later that Rafe left me so he could have a family with a younger woman just made me look pathetic, even to me. I didn't ask them not to tell their father, but I sure was hoping they wouldn't. I'll admit I wasn't exactly forthcoming about this new phase of my life. When the kids came home for Christmas, my older daughter casually asked if they were going to meet my boyfriend. That's when I confessed we were no longer together. "So you traded a quarter of a century of love with Dad for a few years of companionship with some younger guy." "Oh, wait, my mistake, a few years of the best sex of your life," my daughter criticized. There wasn't much I could say. I looked down at the floor. Losing Rafe wasn't as devastating as losing Mike. Rafe was an incredible partner, but Mike was my soulmate, my everything. Returning to an empty apartment after work each day was emotionally draining, but at least I had the anticipation of fulfilling intimacy several times a week. When Rafe left, I had nothing. Loneliness became unbearable, so I found myself open to dating again. Surprisingly, most of the men interested were in their 30s or even 20s. Maybe this woman in her late 40s wasn't so unappealing after all. I enjoyed the company of several men, though none compared to my ex. Perhaps because I had been out of the dating scene for so long, I noticed that men's expectations had evolved over the past 25 years, especially among younger men. They seemed to expect immediate physical intimacy, and if it didn't occur, there often wasn't a second date. Not that I was prudish, but I wasn't willing to rush into anything. When physical intimacy did occur, it was generally enjoyable from my perspective, and my partners seemed very satisfied. The younger guys especially seemed to appreciate my figure, while the older ones preferred oral intimacy. However, most encounters lacked the emotional connection I longed for. I tried to subtly inquire about Mike when talking to the kids. I suspected he wasn't dating, which gave me hope. After all, we had shared a wonderful marriage for 23 years. But I knew if I wanted to reconnect, I'd have to take the first step. "Mike, would you perhaps like to grab a cup of coffee with me sometime?" I asked nervously when I called him a few months later. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry about that. But I miss our conversations. I'd really like it if we could be friends again." Sure, Tracy, we could do that, I think," he responded cautiously. I do miss your company, and I think I'm in a much better place now than I was." We set up our coffee date for the next Saturday. Mike, I have to admit, Tracy looked fantastic when she walked into the Starbucks where we agreed to meet. 2 years hadn't changed a thing. She still looked as youthful and attractive as ever. I wasn't sure whether to hug her or not, but she made the decision for me by stepping into my space, kissing me softly on the cheek, and wrapping her arms around me. I returned the hug. "Why hasn't someone swept you away by now?" I asked genuinely. She blushed, looking adorable. "Apparently, not everyone has your good taste," she replied with a smile. Taking a moment to regroup, we ordered our coffees and pastries. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, reminiscent of our chats during our marriage. The engaging dialogue led us to indulge in a second cup of coffee. Let's take a little break. If you like stories like this, then subscribe to my channel. Continuing the story. This was fun, Tracy, I remarked as we prepared to leave. How about we do lunch next time? I could tell my invitation caught her off guard, judging by the surprise in her eyes. Sure, that would be nice, she responded quietly. Give me your phone, and I'll add my new number. 2 weeks later, I called her to set up a lunch date. It dawned on me that it had been over 25 years since I last went on a date, especially since my divorce from Tracy. Despite the emotional toll of our breakup, I tried to project indifference to the outside world. But deep down, what she did tore my heart apart, keeping me away from dating altogether. Tracy and I enjoyed pleasant lunches at our favorite Italian restaurant over the next year. Although she may have hoped for more, I kept our interactions limited to lunches, maintaining control over the situation. The thought of progressing to dinner and beyond was a line I refused to cross. Tracy, Mike seemed to have wised up over the years. While I knew he appreciated our time together, he never extended dinner invitations. I thought he might eventually, leading to spending the night together. Knowing he wasn't dating, I saw an opportunity to win him back if I could reignite his passion. But he never gave me that chance. Lunch at IHOP hardly set the mood for intimacy. Taking the hint, I resumed dating others. It seemed I'd have to accept my fate as just another date on the scene. Mike, Tracy's actions messed with my head so much that I didn't date for 5 years. I didn't consider our lunches as dates, although she clearly did. While perusing tequilas at my favorite liquor store, I sensed someone beside me. She seemed interested in the same thing. Figuring she could benefit from my knowledge, I struck up a conversation. Are you planning to drink the tequila or drown it? I asked, smiling. I would never drown good tequila. I drink it like I drink my coffee, straight up, she replied. Margaritas are for parties, but for real drinking, I keep it pure. Impressed, I turned to face her. Drinks tequila straight and looks good. No rings. I estimated she was a bit younger than me. Her curly dark auburn hair fell just past her shoulders, and her sparkling blue eyes hinted at her Irish heritage, much like mine. I snapped out of my reverie when she spoke, realizing she had asked me a question. Subtle. Real subtle, she teased, and I felt myself blush. I'm sorry. I got lost in the moment, I admitted weakly. A dozen tequila brands and a woman who knows her stuff, it's not a common occurrence in my world. She flashed a crooked smile, and I thought she might leave, but then she surprised me by speaking again. And what world would that be, Mr. Tequila Snob, she quipped. Loserville, USA, ma'am, I muttered. Ma'am? Did you just ma'am me? She exclaimed incredulously. Do I look like your mother or something? Apologies. It's a habit. Blame my parents. But no, you don't resemble my mother. Not even on her best day, I replied, surprised at my own words. She seemed taken aback, but her surprise melted into a sly smile. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice her tight, curvy figure. Why Loserville, Mr. Tequila Snob? You don't strike me as someone who'd struggle to get a date, she remarked. I haven't been on a date in 5 years, since my cheating ex-wife and I divorced, I confessed quietly. Ooh. Sorry to hear that, she responded awkwardly. There was a brief silence until she spoke up again, steering the conversation back to tequila. I offered my recommendations, and we chatted a bit more about prices and preferences before she nodded, seemingly ending the discussion. But then I took a chance and invited her to sample tequila with me next door, and to my surprise, she accepted. Over the next couple of hours, we enjoyed tequila and snacks, engaging in lively conversation. As we left the bar, I had Rose Smart's phone number. For the next week, I was on cloud 9, thrilled at the prospect of a date with a beautiful woman. But then the reality set in, I hadn't been on a date in ages. I started feeling queasy, wondering where I could take her and if I could hold a decent conversation. I realized that some things hadn't changed, especially when it came to dating. Women held the power, and they were aware of it. Yet, Rose had given me her number willingly, without me resorting to any drastic measures. That had to count for something, right? The internal debate raged on for days, and it might have continued indefinitely if fate hadn't intervened, in the form of Anna Sirotino, whom I literally bumped into in the office hallway. Still grappling with what to do about Rose, I accidentally collided with Anna. As she stumbled in her 3-inch heels, I instinctively reached out to steady her, apologizing profusely. "I may not be very noticeable, but I doubt you'd miss me even with bells and whistles," Anna remarked after regaining her balance. "Problem?" Anna was probably around the same age as my younger daughter. We had occasional conversations, often with me offering fatherly advice. She also served as my personal guide to the younger generation. Whenever I needed something explained in terms that made sense to my 50-year-old brain, I sought out Anna. Yeah, actually," I stammered, feeling like a bumbling fool. Anna looked up at me with a curious expression, then broke into her characteristic goofy grin. I was puzzled, but that was nothing new. "Is this problem related to a girl, or rather, a woman?" she asked playfully. "Kind of, yeah, I suppose, yes," I mumbled awkwardly. She steadied me for a moment before making a decision. "All right, spill the beans after work at Murphy's. And no teasing if I order a fancy drink or you're on your own," she instructed firmly. Later that day, Anna sat across from me at Murphy's, amusement dancing in her eyes as I stumbled through an explanation about Rose. "So you haven't dated anyone since your divorce 5 years ago? Not a single person? That's quite surprising," she teased. Her mockery stung a bit, but deep down, I knew Anna's tone was still caring. "And how long ago did she give you her number? Are we still in the same month?" "Year," she quipped. "It was 5 days ago, Missy, and if you keep up with that mouth, I might have to give you a talking to," I responded, half-jokingly. "Ooh, we might both enjoy that," she retorted cheekily. One of us blushed, and it certainly wasn't her. "Seriously, Mike, what's the holdup? You're not a lost cause, you know." "Just give her a call," Anna advised earnestly. Anna spent the next half hour sharing some of the dating experiences she and her friends had. I resisted the temptation to pull out a notepad and jot down notes. "Do you know how to dance?" she asked at one point. "Does the Pope have 3 left feet?" I quipped in response. "I'll take that as a no, then. You know, women really enjoy it when a man takes them dancing. It's physical and gets things going," she explained with a grin. "Really? I always thought that was just a myth," I admitted. "Absolutely true, 100%. It's like foreplay," she asserted. "La la la," I joked as I covered my ears. She gave me a knowing look before grinning again. "Oh, and don't forget to carry a condom with you. It's better to be prepared," she advised, looking me straight in the eyes. "Yes, Mom," I retorted playfully. That evening, I called Rose and arranged a date for the following Saturday. Anna advised me not to dwell too much on my past marriage during the date, but to be honest if Rose asked about it. Though discussing what happened made me uncomfortable, Rose was empathetic. She then shared her own story, which involved the end of a 15-year marriage after she caught her husband with a neighbor. "Tracy, the physical pain from the syphilis I contracted wasn't as unbearable as the humiliation I faced at the doctor's office. While the medical staff remained completely professional, I could sense their judgment. It didn't improve when I listed 6 recent sexual partners for them to notify. 6 notifications, I overheard one nurse whisper to another as they glanced at my chart. Thank goodness she's not 25. I felt the urge to lash out, but I had to admit that it sounded pretty bad. I hadn't realized it at the time, but I had been quite promiscuous since Rafe left me following Mike's divorce. Perhaps I was trying to fill the void they left, but none of my encounters came close to what I had with Mike or Rafe. Maybe I was substituting quality with quantity without even realizing it. I never considered the consequences until now. Having unprotected sex with most of my partners was foolish and irresponsible. I wasn't drunk or reckless. I always chose men who appeared clean and well-kept. But as the saying goes, when you sleep with someone, you're also sleeping with everyone they've been with recently. I just never stopped to think, what an idiot I've been. At least I didn't have to confess my problem to anyone else. Mike, Rose and I tied the knot approximately the year after our initial date. Despite lingering trust issues, we tackled them head-on with love and the guidance of an excellent counselor. Gently pushing Rose away, we lay on our sides, facing each other, both of us catching our breath. At 75, and after 25 years of marriage, once-a-week lovemaking sufficed. We'd spend an additional 10 minutes kissing and cuddling before drifting off to sleep. Describing Rose as my savior wouldn't be an exaggeration. After splitting from Tracy, I was adrift. I felt clueless about dating. Rose allowed me to navigate my way, sometimes quite literally, and we grew together. Despite my doubts, I found a lifelong companion to age gracefully with. Tracy. Once I re-entered the dating scene post-situation, I became more discerning in choosing partners. Some of it might have been due to menopause. Some of it might have been because, despite still looking fairly attractive in my 50s, the younger crowd no longer paid me much attention. With a surplus of single women compared to men in their 40s and 50s, competition was fierce. If someone had asked me a few years ago, I would have confidently stated that I'd grow old with my devoted husband, Mike. Unfortunately, my arrogance led to its downfall. Moving into a senior community made sense a few years back. My old house felt too large for one person. I see my kids and grandkids every few months, though it took several years for our relationships to stabilize. Mike and I remain on friendly terms, but our lunch outings ceased once I realized they wouldn't bring me any closer to him. It took him a while, but Mike eventually dipped his toes back into the dating pool after years of solitude. I'll admit, I envy the way he gazes at Rose. Witnessing their affectionate interactions during family gatherings makes me queasy. I can't help but wonder if it could have been me. Was it all worth it? It's a question I ask myself often, and I rarely like the answer. Write your opinion in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Remember, you're writing a story too, and it's up to you whether it's a good one or not.